Federalism Systems. We began our discussion of federalism in our last segment, where we talked about the different compromises which had to be reached in the formation of the Constitution. The Constitution divided our government up into a federal system, in which we have a national and central layer, and we have a layer of the states. As we discussed before, federalism is a political system in which the power is divided between central and regional units. We talked about how federal is not the same as national and central, but rather is a combination of the national and central plus the state layer. And this is what happens when power is given to both the nation and the state, and they're able to work together in the administration of the government. We also talked about confederalism, which is the opposite, a political system in which the states hold all the power. So let's talk a little bit more about the alternatives to federalism before we really get into delving into what our federalist system looks like in the United States. Well, the federal system, which is in the middle, which is the one we just talked about, with the central and state governments, there are two corollaries which we can use at the same time. We have a unitary system, in which there is power only allocated to a central government, and then there's a confederal system, where you have power only allocated to the state governments. And so it's important to consider the fact that the Founding Fathers actually had options. They didn't dream up the Federalist system in a vacuum. They didn't think about it as the only option. And in fact, there were several different parties who were players in the Constitutional Convention who really were pushing confederalism as the way to go. Remember, we were talking about the strong states' rights advocates in the form of the Anti-Federalists. Well, these would be people who were advocating for a confederal system. On the other hand, they could also have chosen a unitary system, where everything flowed through the central government, and the state governments were pretty much disregarded in terms of the running of the country. Instead, we have really a middle ground, which takes both sides, puts them together, which is really why we call this the first compromise, as we had in the previous lesson. So let's look at the difference between unitary and confederal systems. In a unitary system, you have the central government holding all of the power, versus in a confederal system where the local units have all of the power. So really that is the polar opposite beginning of them, is who holds the power within the actual government. Is it held in one central location? So you could imagine, for example, Washington, D.C. running the entire country, and there being no local units of government for you to go to, no state level government, no local governments, but really most things flowing out of the central government, with really just little pieces that they put here and there in the local areas to enforce what the central government wants. Versus the opposite, where you would have maybe, like we looked at the United States under the Articles of Confederation, this loose confederation of friendship, in which each state had its own system of government, and really we just worked together, but had nothing on top of us as an umbrella which was binding us together. And that's what you would look at in a confederal system. In a unitary system, all the local units are dependent on the central unit. So like I said, that central power is going to be the one putting feelers out into the local units, but there is no local government in and of itself. They're all going to be small divisions or small parts of that central power. Versus in a confederal system, where the central government is dependent on local units for existence. So for example, in the Articles of Confederation, it couldn't exist without all of the different states working together in order to make this loose friendship work. In a unitary system, the power of the government is such that it can suspend local lawmaking bodies. It can also dissolve administrative units that don't agree. So if you're going to have a situation, for example, a state that doesn't agree with another state, or a state that doesn't agree with something that the federal government is doing, the national central government is doing, there really is no dialogue back and forth. The central government can just decide, well, you local body that we sent out there in the first place, we don't like what you're doing, so we're going to suspend all of the power that you have, And this particular administrative group that we have handling this particular business, you're not working with us the way that we want you to, so we're just going to dissolve you. We're going to make sure that that is not a problem because we have to ensure that the central government's agenda is carried out. With the confederal system, on the other hand, power requires cooperation from the units. The units have to actually work together in order for things to get done because there is no central power that's going to coordinate everything for them. Federal systems, on the other hand, have a sharing of power between taking somewhat of a unitary system and somewhat of a confederal system and kind of mashing them together. You can imagine a system where you have a couple of layers on top of each other. So you have a central or national layer of government laid on top of a layer of states' governments. Both are dependent on each other. So it's not an instance that you have a situation where the central government has all of the power and then the states are subservient. They actually need to work together in order to get this government to work. Federalism in and of itself actually includes a range of behaviors. Some give more powers to the states, some give more power to the central government, but it's the balance which makes the federalist system work. And another thing to notice, all three of these systems, the unitary, the confederal, and the federal system, they are models that have been imposed upon us by political scientists. No government is going to fit exactly into the square box that is a model. And so when you think about things like federalism, and you can think to yourself, I know parts of our government that lean more toward a unitary system or lean more toward a confederal system, it's because we don't have governments that are meant to fit into the box of models. And so when we categorize governments as having a particular system, and this goes for any political system or any system you'll study in a political science course or even an economics course, you have to think that we do our best to fit a very strangely shaped object, like a government or like a governmental system, into these square boxes that are the models. So we fit them the best that we can, but there are always going to be little pieces falling in and out, and that's because of the ever-changing nature and dynamic nature of these governments in of themselves when we're trying to impose superficial, static models on top of them. So why would you use federalism? Well, there's one prevailing theory. There are actually many theories. One of the theories that I like the best is called the states as laboratories theory. The idea here is that we have 50 different states that face very similar problems. Some, they have problems of trying to make sure that the crime is taken care of, that kids are educated, that people are fed. And if we have 50 different states trying 50 different ways of fixing the problem, someone's going to get it. Someone's going to figure out how to solve the problem, and then they'll be able to share the results and have their results copied and transferred to the other states. That way we can actually find out what the best practices are in all of these different laboratories. The pictures below show the different types of voting machines which are used, or actually two of the types. There are very, very many types of voting machines used in different counties across different states. You have a touchscreen Diebold voting machine down on the bottom right over there, and then you have a punch card machine of Florida fame that's on the bottom left over there. And this is just an example of the states as laboratories theory. You have many different states trying many different ways of voting, and they can see how different states are reacting to it. What worked well and what didn't. Maybe this particular system which worked well in this one state will work well for us too. Or maybe it wouldn't because they're facing slightly different situations or circumstances which make our particular problem unique in some way and create a situation where we have to find another solution. But at any rate, we get an instance where we can take a look at the same problem and a lot of different brilliant minds from different states trying to figure it out and being able to share best ideas with each other.